समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
I will just straight away say that this is Russia's KGB propaganda and disinformation at its best.
Because of the sheer military industrial might and the manpower that Russia has, the argument from the Russian side is that Ukraine is simply delaying the inevitable. So they are stretching the war, but ultimately it is going to end in Russia's favor.
Putin understands that he cannot win this war militarily. If he could, he would have already.
When the United States of America wants to sort of violate Venezuela's sovereignty, because Venezuela has been, called a criminal state or a narco state, where is the rules-based order then? Or, for example, whatever happened in Middle East, in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Swasti, I have to cut you off there because this is the standard what we call whataboutism here. What happened there is that actually Azerbaijan, with the help of Turkey, took advantage of the strategic disaster that Russia suffered in Ukraine.
Why do you think Turkey is expanding its influence with Azerbaijan? What has gone wrong with Armenia?
I would say what we're looking at right now is the strategic disaster for Russia. That is absolutely unacceptable for me. I was really surprised to hear that this is kind of a dominant narrative in India's scholarship. The strategic partnership with Russia does not bring you peace. Armenia and Ukraine is the great example of that. So you're never safe with Russians.
Welcome to the WorldView with Swasti. As you know, the Russia-Ukraine war is now going to enter its 5th year. And just as the military, fighting on the ground has been intensifying around the region of Pokrovsk, and things remain very uncertain right now in terms of how long will it take for Ukrainians to hold on to Pokrovsk, because Russians are really doubling down there. There is a lot happening in Russian backyard. If you may have noticed, for the first ever time, Trump has met the Central Asian countries all together in Washington, D.C. Now, this is something which has never really happened before. Similarly, you see that in the Caucasus, which was the Russian underbelly, the soft Russian underbelly, you see that Turkey has joined hands with Azerbaijan in terms of this very pompous military parade. And you don't see Russia there. These regions, whether Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, which is collectively known as the Caucasus, used to be the Russian backyard. Similarly, the Central Asian region used to be the Russian backyard as well. Many countries from this region are still members to the CSTO, which is the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the Russian equivalent of the NATO. So to unpack these things about what is really going on in the Russian backyard, okay, and not just the Russia-Ukraine war per se, I'm joined by just the right expert. Very pleased to welcome Mr. Shota Gvineria. He was the Deputy National Security Advisor of Georgia from 2016 to 2018. He's currently a professor at the Baltic Defense College. And today he joins me from Washington, D.C., where he's senior fellow at the Delphi Global. So Shota has donned many hats, as you can see. He's served in the government. He's been the national security advisor. He's also been a professor. He works on a lot of strategic, issues. But more than anything, he's an expert on the Russian security and foreign policy. So Shota, let's begin from here. First of all, welcome to the show, and thanks for taking the time out. It's early morning in DC, and you're very kind, and we are grateful for that. So help us understand what is going on in the Russian backyard, because when we look at the war is one aspect of what is happening in your region. The other aspect is the Caucasus, the Central Asians, the Middle East, and all the extended theaters. Let's start from your theater first. Why do you think Turkey is expanding its influence with Azerbaijan? What has gone wrong with Armenia? Why is Armenia not happy with CSTO? And what do you think is going to happen?
Okay, Swasti, there is a really handful of topics you have already unpacked. First of all, thank you very much for the interest and for inviting me to your show. I want to say hi to everybody listening and watching today. I don't get the chance to speak often to the Indian audiences, so I'm happy now to be here with you. Thank you very much. First, let me start by challenging the frame which you suggested in the beginning of your introduction by calling South Caucasus and the Black Sea region and Central Asia a Russian backyard. I think basically this is what Russia wish it was, and they have been trying to impose their sphere of exclusive influence in these regions by force, using brutal force for decades. But this does not mean that basically because these regions were under Soviet occupation first, and then after regaining independence, they were under Russia's hybrid warfare pressure, that we have to call it a Russian backyard, and we have to basically sign this off as something that Russia needs to be in charge and in control, perpetually, because they have managed to occupy the region and they managed to harass all of us there for decades. So I would say what we're looking at right now is the strategic disaster for Russia. Because they have started out this 3-day war in Ukraine 3 years ago. Their objective was to take Kiev in 3 days, and they were ignorant enough to think that that's possible, because they had a couple of misconceptions right there. They had two main misconceptions that guided their military strategy in 2022 when they launched their illegal full-scale invasion of Ukraine. First was that they thought their hybrid warfare in Ukraine was so successful that many Ukrainians, especially the Russian-speaking Ukrainians, would welcome Russian tanks with balloons and flowers, as a friendly force, and they would be okay with Russia occupying Ukraine again. Of course, that was not true, and the biggest treasure for every nation is sovereignty and freedom, and even the ones that had a very positive view of Russia in Ukraine, they didn't want Russian occupation to come back. They wanted Russia as a neighbor, but Russia proved not capable of being a good neighbor. And then they interpreted this good, friendly, neighborly intentions of some Ukrainians as an invitation for the occupation, And that's what they did in 2022. And the second great misconception, even bigger than this, was that Russians were absolutely sure that the West will not help Ukraine. And they thought, even if Ukrainians, managed to unite and they fight back our invasion, they will not have enough resources for that. They don't have money, they don't have weapon systems, and we will just crush them in the battlefield. That was the second conception, and that didn't hold true as well, because this process hasn't started in 2022. Swasti, I think this is crucially important to remind the viewers of this episode that this strategic disaster now, because they have not been able to achieve their objectives in Ukraine, they are struggling for these small pieces of land for months, and this territory is going back and forth. Now, you mentioned one specific area in Ukraine, which is in the forefront of the battle today. Tomorrow there will be the other one. And the Russians will take some part of the territory today. Ukrainians will get back some other territory tomorrow. So it's shifting. It's going back and forth. Russians are not able able to move forward in that. There's
Okay, but Shota, just one thing I'd like to clarify here, also for the viewers, because when I'm fully aware of the battlefront tactics, I do a lot of field work in Ukraine, so I obviously keep going to Ukraine to actually see what is happening on the battlefront, and I agree with your assessment. But there's one thing that I would like to still have your views on, and I'm sorry to interject, but there's one important thing that because of the sheer military industrial might and the manpower that Russia has. The argument from the Russian side is that Ukraine is simply delaying the inevitable. So they are stretching the war, but ultimately it is going to end in Russia's favor. What would be your view on that? Because you are coming from Georgia. I mean, you study Russia. You have also seen what happened in 2008. Please help us understand the nuance of this.
right.
Because I also see that Russia has a massive military industrial capability. You cannot deny that.
Yeah, well, okay. I'll try to deny that, and I'll try to show that in a bigger picture.
Okay.
So what happened after that disastrous strategic disaster for Russia, after not being able, of course, to take Kiev in 3 days, and after not being able to achieve decisive advantage in the war, the battle for Ukraine, as I said, this advantage keeps shifting. Sometimes some days are better for Ukrainians, they're advancing, some days are better for Russians, but they're not. The fact is that they're not able to show decisive advantage. Neither of the side today has a decisive advantage to win this war right now.
Okay.
At this
Yeah.
time. Putin very well understands that. Putin understands that he cannot win this war militarily. If he could, he would have already. So I absolutely don't agree with this fact that time is now on Putin's side. So one thing he's doing now is that because he understands that he cannot win this conflict militarily, he is trying to bleed this way to the point where he scares everybody with this third world war, with this nuclear exchange, and uses his, notorious usual blackmailing cards that through propaganda and disinformation campaigns that, okay, now, Russia is big, Russia is powerful, you cannot defeat Russia. And that's why you need to talk to us, and even though we're not capable of winning, you will give us the victory because we can make things worse. Russia, what is going on after this 2022 strategic disaster is that they're losing their influence everywhere. They have lost their influence in the Middle East, in Syria. They have been kicked out from Syria, to be blunt and honest. And in Syria, they have been fighting for so many years to maintain their foothold because they understand that their entrance to the entire region is through Syria. Now they're not there anymore. Okay. Second, the biggest leverage that they had in their neighborhood, in what they want to see as this sphere of exclusive influence. That's how they define the Black Sea region and the South Caucasus and the Baltics, for that matter, in their strategy and strategic formulation. Okay. The biggest leverage that they had there, Karabakh War, that was there for years, and they have been using this Karabakh War against both Armenia and Azerbaijan. They were trying to balance and protract this war to keep this war going for as long as possible, because they were selling weapons to Azerbaijan, and at the same time they were granting the same amount of weapons to Armenia, for free, because they were strategic partners. And they wanted to make sure that neither side would have a decisive advantage there, because they didn't want the war to end, because by this war, they used it as a leverage to stop development and put it as a grip on both nations. They have lost.
No, but so what happened about that? So what happened? So help me understand. Since we are discussing the Nagorno-Karabakh region and Armenia, Azerbaijan, this is a region which is very important to us, Shota, because India, just as Russia stopped to supply, Armenia stopped buying weapons from Russia. Obviously, they were disgruntled. India has emerged as the biggest defense supplier to Armenia. Okay. And right now you see a situation of sort of normalization happening, but then Azerbaijan has also carried out this wonderful military day, victory day parade. And you see, from India's perspective, from New Delhi's perspective, Shota, I'd like to have your views on this fact, because what we see is that the Russian influence declining and the Turkish influence rising in the region. Is this a correct reading? And do you think Russia's going to make a comeback there? And what is the mood between these two nations? What do they think about Russia? I mean, they are your neighbors too. You're in Georgia, so you make a part of that. So
Right.
please help us understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened there is that actually Azerbaijan, with the help of Turkey, took advantage of the strategic disaster that Russia suffered in Ukraine, as I said, and Russia is fully consumed by its war in Ukraine. If anybody has an illusion that they have not started the war yet, and they're still they have some secret weapons under their sleeve, and they will they can make it worse for Ukrainians if they wanted to. No, that's not true. They have actually exhausted all the potential. Russians are fighting now not even the Second World War tactics, but they're fighting the First World War tactics. On why Azerbaijan actually saw this as an opportunity, because Russia has never been weaker than this, and probably will never be weaker than this for the decades to come, because, as I said, they have exhausted all their potential. They have been losing their influences everywhere, and that was the right moment now when Azerbaijan understood that Russia cannot intervene in this conflict the way it used to before, and they just did their job. They just went for the restoration of their territorial integrity, and Turkey, which is the strategic partner of Azerbaijan for years and decades, have supported, of course, and there was nothing Russia could do about it, as we have seen. Now, what we see is the process where Armenia and Azerbaijan are learning again from the scratch how to be neighbors and how to work together in terms of the regional projects, and some new big infrastructure projects are coming in. Turkey is part of that, is benefiting a lot from that, because Turkey is an energy thirsty country. They need Azerbaijan as the energy supplier, and they have a lot of trade and economic relations that are really important for Turkey. So for Turkey's economic development model, energy is the key. It's industrial economy, and they need more energy. Every year they need more energy than the last year. For that they need very stable base and very stable relationships with Azerbaijan. And what we see now is another paradox, that Georgia, who has been always the most pro-Western, pro-European, pro-NATO, pro-American country in the region, that was the exception of a democratic governance in that part of the world. We were trying to be an A+ student, and build a really truly free European model of governance there for decades. Now we see that Russia has lost all these influences in the rest of the region, and it gained its influences only in Georgia, because Georgia's what they have started in 2014. Thank you for reminding me again. With this annexation of Crimea, hasn't really started in 2014. It started in 2008 in Georgia. That's when they first used their military force to change the borders of its neighbor. So that's what we're saying.
But Shota, no, I'll just stop you there, because you're taking us back to 2008, and actually, frankly, you're right. The 2008 is the first war in post-Cold War Europe, and you are referring to Southeast Asia and Abkhazia, and it's. But for the benefit of the viewers, I'd also like to sort of contextualize it and say that from Russia's perspective, they launched this sort of operation to liberate, they say, the pro-Russia population in Abkhazia and Southeast Asia, because Georgia, 2008 was when Georgia and Ukraine for the first time expressed their willingness to join the NATO, and Russia doesn't want you to join NATO. Now, could you please
Well,
help us explain
yeah,
this?
I'll try to reply to this with the facts, only the facts,
Okay.
because I am Georgian. I have obviously my objective and subjective attachment to this topic, so I'll just get away the interpretation part of it, and I will just tell you the sheer facts so that your viewers can basically do their own analysis of the facts.
Okay.
Russia has been in full effective control of Georgia's occupied territories of Abkhazia and South Ossetia from early 90s. In 1991 and 1992, Russia has actually started its bases in these both territories after the brief war between Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, and separatist movements in these regions. Russia came in, they occupied both regions, they established their military control there, they ethnically cleansed both regions from Georgian population completely. So there was before that conflict, Georgians were the majority in both of the regions. After the conflict, Georgia became a marginal, very small minority because it was ethnically purified from Georgians, right? Ever since that, they have been in full control of both regions. So claiming that somebody was violating somebody's rights in any of these regions cannot be factually true, because Georgia didn't have access to any of these territories since the early 90s. So they have used this as a pretext to basically find a reason to come in and destabilize Georgia, because they thought Georgia was developing its democratic and Euro-Atlantic integration paths so quickly that they could really lose Georgia. Like they lost Baltic states. The Baltic states, they basically did it. This development process is much quicker, and they joined the European and Euro-Atlantic integration, and Russia lost leverage on them, and there is no way they can get it back. Now they wanted to prevent this in Georgia. And they use pretext of violation of the rights of the Russian speakers, as they do everywhere. They went to liberate their Ukrainian brothers and sisters, in Ukraine, with the same pretext, of course. And then this all started in Georgia, as I said.
So, all right, Shota, I mean, that was quite interesting because sitting here in New Delhi, of course, sometimes you don't really have a deep understanding of, these regions which are really far away from us. But there is one perception which continues to operate and continues to exist in many of Indian strategic scholars. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it is there, which is that, countries that belong to the, let's say, the Soviet bloc, your country being one, Armenia, Azerbaijan, of course, we all know, Caucasus, the Central Asians, the Baltics, Ukraine, there as well. Now, you do see that as the Cold War ended, you did see a wave of color revolutions. And there is a tendency to look at these countries less as sovereign countries that got their independence and more as CIA projects. So every time when there is an like a view of these countries wanting to join the Western Bloc, there is a view that is being done by fueling a certain narrative by the CIA for many, many years and many, many decades. How much would you agree with it? Because that narrative continues to hold in many countries, including India or Africa, or what you refer to as the global south. Why do you think the global south has an understanding which is quite different from what you would like to identify yourself as? Okay.
Yeah. Well, okay. So now I will not use diplomatic language here. I will just straight away say that this is the Russia's KGB propaganda and disinformation at its best. Because the countries in the region, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia, are Asian countries with the sovereignty well preceding that of Russia's. Because when these countries were there in the region, defining the regional dynamics and having established relations with the countries like, Mongolia, China, and other big empires, Byzantia, and Roman Empire, Russia was not there at all. I mean, it was the Russians didn't have their statehood yet. So when Russian Empire first occupied Georgia in 1801 for a number of years, then we have fought back our independence actually briefly in 1918 through 1921 for 3 brief years before Soviet occupation basically returned, and then we have been occupied by the Red Army of the Soviet. But in between, they have recognized Georgia's regaining Georgia's independence. So basically, even Russia's narrative cannot basically have any argument to claim that these countries lack any sort of sovereignty because they were occupied for so long. So if occupation would basically be a tool for taking away the sovereignty of the nations, then the world would really look different. Now, look at your own region. If colonial domination of some other countries in the region would be the undermining factor of the sovereignty today, then how would your region look like that? So it's basically, I think, the argument that goes against historic facts, it goes against the international law provisions, and it goes against any sort of moral standards that I can think of. So basically, questioning Georgia's, Azerbaijan's, and Armenia's sovereignty is basically a KGB's project. They had this special term for that, which is near abroad. They called these countries a near abroad, because the real abroad was the NATO and European Union, the countries which Russia could not claim to be part of their sphere of exclusive influence. But the near abroad was kind of, the countries which they could not deny were sovereign and independent, but they thought and argued that that Russia somehow, for some reason, because they're big and strong, had the right to decide the fate of their countries instead of these countries. And because they were neighboring Russia, they meant to be part of Russia's orbit. This is, of course, something that doesn't make any sense. As I said, neither historically, not legally, and not in any sort of moral compass. If we start now, challenging this rules-based international system and start challenging the UN charter, which is based on the inherent sovereignty, inherent right of the sovereignty for all the nations that are members of the United Nations, because they have big neighbor with nuclear weapons. Now we start challenging the sovereignty of the countries. That is absolutely unacceptable for me. I was really surprised to hear that this is kind of a dominant narrative in India's scholarship. I must say I'm not aware of India's intellectual discussion at this point, but from now on, I will have a closer look at that, because if there are scientists thinking this way, we really need to engage in a proper discussion with them. Because
That's you have a valid point, Chota, because my own view was that you cannot really understand a conflict unless you go and speak to the people that are getting affected by it. Okay, otherwise you are simply having a very top-down approach, and top-down approach often doesn't really tell you much apart from, let's say, the larger strategic picture. It can just give you certain key takeaways like might is right, and that's about it, and you are sort of missing all the nuances. So just as we would like our security nuances to be better understood by the rest of the world, I think it is as much incumbent upon us to sort of do the same. That's one part. But there is a reason, Shota, why this narrative seems to be getting acceptance or is more accepted in what you refer to, as countries of the global south, which I don't really agree with the term, because as academics, we know that this term is problematic. But let's say countries that are not really part of the typical Western bloc, okay? And that reason is that when you talk about the rules-based international order, we do see that the rules-based international order doesn't really operate uniformly for everybody. So when the United States of America wants to sort of violate Venezuela's sovereignty, because Venezuela has been, called a criminal state or a narco state, where is the rules-based order then? Or, for example, whatever happened in Middle East, in Iraq, and Afghanistan.
Swasti, I have to cut you off there, because this is the standard what we call whataboutism here in this study of modern disinformation and propaganda. And even if I agree with you that the United States is basically violating the sovereignty of any other nation, that does not give Russia the right to do the same in Georgia and Ukraine. So I will not take this as an argument at all. That's one.
Yeah.
And the second, I would really recommend those people who use those arguments to name the Venezuelan territories that the United States have occupied, or for that matter, any Afghan territories or Iraqi territories that are under United States occupation now. And basically, this is something that leads us into this useless discussion about historic mistakes done by all the countries in the world. There is no perfect country with perfect government, and there never will be. So if we are discussing how illegal, how immoral Russia's war in Ukraine is, and bring some other mistakes, similar mistakes done by other countries in other historic points in time, that's just not the way this discussion should go in any case. We just always have to take each example and, as I said, measure it and have a very calm, very civilized discussion about the legality, morality of each case. And even this rules-based international order, I mentioned it. I know that that's a toxic word for many, and I know that it triggers this discussion, which is polarizing discussion, that it's not easy to get consensus over this discussion, but that's the difference, but why all the countries of the world in the conference agreed to this rules-based international order is that if we do not agree to any certain point in time where we fix the sovereignty of the countries and stop fighting over historic grievances or historic injustices, however we may see it, then it's a perpetual recipe for war. If you see Europe, European borders have been changing constantly from year to year. You cannot name a single region in Europe that has not been part of 5 different countries through the history. So if these 5 different countries now start to count their historic justice from that particular moment in history when they were in control of that region, imagine what will happen. This is
it will be a disaster. It will be a disaster. So here, Shota, I mean, I agree with it, but the point of me.
That's why the rules are so important. These rules are so important, and if we try to analyze the rules and every case of the violation of those rules, and then we don't do it with full honesty, but we use it to justify one specific violation of the rules over the other, then it all loses the main point.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a valid point because, of course, two wrongs cannot make a right. I mean, I totally agree there. But the point of me raising that issue, Shota, was not to justify what Russia's done to your country or in Ukraine. I mean, it is a clear case of aggression. But the point of me sort of raising that issue was because it happens to be one of the more accepted narratives, and there has to be a way to sort of enable a conversation where you're able to take it head on, because it's wrong. I mean, I totally agree that the minute you start talking about a problem today, you cannot go back and say that what about this one and what about that one. But I think what is more important is to sort of address the inequalities and the sort of injustices that a huge section of the world has actually been at the receiving end of, right? And sort of having that conversation with that respect. I think that is what is perhaps the takeaway here. Now, yeah, that's now, but Shota, now we're also sort of running to the end of the conversation. But I really have to take your, and thank you for that wonderful elaboration on Armenia, Azerbaijan, Caucasus. Of course, that's a very, very important theater for us as well. I told you India is the largest defense supplier to Armenia, and Azerbaijan is very close to Pakistan, so of course that also makes it very relevant to us. But very quickly, now bringing your attention to Central Asia. What has happened in DC lately has been quite historic. For the first ever time, the 5 leaders of the Central Asian countries that are again considered to be Russia's soft underbelly, right, pretty much in the sphere of influence, sandwiched between Russia and China, have met Donald Trump in DC. You see energy talks happening. You see, a rising US presence in the region. Do you see this indicates a lack or a weaning of Russian influence in the region? Or do you think that this is just a matter of time? After the war ends, everything is going to go back to normal. How do you read this? Because this is historic.
It actually depends very much on how the war ends. I always say that this war in Ukraine will define the type of the world we will live in after this. We're now talking about not some sort of, territorial concessions. We're now talking about desovereignization of Ukraine and taking away 5 of its regions forcefully through the use of military force. This will be the game changer for the world's security architecture. If we, the international community, and I would not differentiate it with the South or the West or the East or in whatever ways. If the international system that is there now will allow this to happen, the world will not be the same again. It will send a very clear signal to everybody that the only possible security guarantee in the new security environment where we are is the nuclear weapons. So if the result of this is that Russia gets away with what it wants and is emerging as a victor in this unjust and illegal war, then we will have to sit down and think what precedent we have just created and what are the rules under which we all operate now. What does it tell us about the behavior of other great powers now? And how can we protect ourselves in this new environment?
Okay.
And that will be the end of the world security architecture as we know it, and that's why I think there will be no winners in this situation.
But can I just bring you back to then the Central Asian region? I mean, what do you think is going? Do you also see, because basically we are talking about these 2 theaters in Caucasus and Central Asia. Both these theaters, the countries here were part of the Soviet Empire and then the Soviet Union. And now you see the Central Asians, of course, they are known to have a multi-vector foreign policy. That's what it is called, So they have ties with China, they have ties with, of course, Russia, they have ties with Europe, with Turkey. But now you see United States there. United States as a major sort of rallying force, or sort of rallying all of them together and brought them to DC. Do you see this is also a kind of a change of sorts, or this is one of those little quick victories that Donald Trump likes to register?
Well, I would again challenge this frame that you suggest here, Swasti. I mean, these are sovereign countries. Let's just think for a while about being in the shoes of a country which is, certainly not a great power, and then they have a choice, that they have been cooperating with Russia on certain issues for decades. Then they see that it doesn't work. They see that the threat from Russia is increasing and growing day by day. The strategic partnership with Russia does not bring you peace. Armenia and Ukraine is the great example of that. So you're never safe with Russians. No matter what agreement you have with them today, it can change tomorrow. They can bring weapons unless they can convince you with the words. That's the strategic logic of Russia, right? They will try to convince you by their narratives. If they fail, they will bring guns. That's what happens. Everybody knows that now already. So if we keep looking at these processes in Central Asia from this patron-client perspective, and if we want to see this as, this quasi-sovereign nations now want to change their masters from Moscow to Washington, that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong.
Okay.
We have to abandon this 19th century way of thinking. We have to understand that now we live in a different world where proximity to a certain nation and country does not give you anything. It's basically the time and geography is not the defining factor anymore. It doesn't matter. Russia is closer to Kazakhstan than the United States. In this today's technology development and the way economies work today, the way warfare works today, it doesn't matter. Really doesn't matter how far you are or how close you are. We are living in these times of hyper connectivity. So we have to abandon this way of thinking that, because these countries are closer to Russia than to the United States, Russia has more rights to influence them than the United States. No. And these are not the objects. These are the subjects of international law that make their own decisions based on their national interests, and they make their decisions based on their what is more pragmatic for their countries at this point in time. So if this many nations in Central Asia lined up and decided together that now for their national interests, it's better to start talking to the United States about the new frame of cooperation and new avenues of partnership. And we're still looking at this, from this medieval, outrageously obsolete frame that, no, these countries have been close to Russia forever and now they don't have the right to speak to anybody else. That's just so wrong. That's absolutely unheard of. And I'm really very surprised to see this kind of discussions dominating in some parts of the world. And that, I would say, would be the sign of not really understanding how much the world has changed and how much the security environment has changed, how much the cyberspace and technological advances have changed the dynamics in international relations. It's changed the geopolitics. It changed the main variables, how countries define and advance their national interests in this new world. And we don't have to be stuck historic patterns that are obsolete and that does not work anymore in these new realities.
Right. No, I mean, point taken, Shota, because I think that is important. Also, as scholars, I think I'm also extremely careful of the strategic semantics that we deploy to explain a particular situation at hand. Just as strategic technologies are evolving, I mean, we always need the right semantics to address the problem at hand. And a part of what meaning gets conveyed is actually coming from the kind of semantics we'll end up choosing. So I'm with you on that. But on that note, I have to thank you, Shota Gvineria, former Deputy National Security Advisor to Georgia, and to thank you for taking the time out and helping us understand the nuances of the theater that we are really studying very, very keenly, both the Caucasus as well as Central Asia. So thank you for your time, and you keep watching WorldView with Swasti. I'll be back with yet another episode. Stay tuned.
Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation, Swasti.